A girl is kidnapped in the middle of a rainy Chicago night. Her rescuer turns out to be the city's most notorious mafia boss. But when he tries to take her home, she begs him not to. Because that house isn't a refuge. It's where she's been slowly dying for 24 years. This is the story of a violent man learning to protect and a vulnerable woman learning to survive. If you're watching, please like and comment the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has come. The rain came down like it had a grudge. Not the soft, cinematic kind of rain that blurs streetlights into gold halos and makes the city look like a painting. This was Chicago in November. Mean sideways, cold enough to cut through a coat and press its knuckles against your ribs. The kind of rain that emptied streets, that made sensible people stay inside with their doors locked and their curtains drawn. The parking garage on West Monroe was not empty. Level 3, northeast corner, 11:47 p.m. 3 men moved fast between the concrete pillars, their footsteps absorbed by the rain hammering the roof 2 stories above. No conversation, no hesitation. They'd done this before, the way they fanned out, the way the tallest one kept his back to the wall, the way the other 2 bracketed the stairwell exit like they'd rehearsed it, and they had, twice that week alone. Lyra Ashcombe heard them before she saw them. She was walking to her car with her keys already out, the second key pressed between her middle and index finger the way her college roommate once showed her, the way women learn to hold keys not as keys but as weapons, because the city had never really promised anyone safety, only the illusion of it. She heard the footsteps scrape half a second before the arm came around her throat. She didn't scream. That was the thing that surprised her afterward, when she had enough distance to think about it. She didn't scream. She went rigid, then she went boneless the way something does when it understands, on a cellular level, that fighting will make it worse. 24 years had trained that reflex into her so thoroughly she barely noticed she was doing it. The chloroform rag came second. She had maybe 4 seconds of awareness. The chemical stench burning her sinuses, the concrete ceiling spinning above her, the sound of a van door sliding open somewhere to her left, and then the garage folded up like a piece of paper and went dark. Moss. The convoy was 3 vehicles, a black Escalade in front, a second Escalade in the rear, and between them a blacked-out Mercedes S-Class with its windows so tinted you couldn't see your own reflection in them. They moved through the financial district with the particular authority of cars that expected traffic to get out of their way, and traffic did. Dante Viscari was in the back seat of the Mercedes with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, reviewing a contract on a tablet, while his head of security, a Croatian named Bosco who was built like a fire hydrant and twice as immovable, read traffic patterns on a second screen in the front passenger seat. Dante was 41 years old and looked it in the way that men who've spent 2 decades making hard decisions look it. Not old, not soft, but weathered in the particular way of things that have been under pressure for a long time. There were 3 inches of scar tissue along his left forearm that he'd had long enough he'd stopped noticing it. His hair was dark and cut close. His hands were calm. He wasn't a man who fidgeted. "The Ashcombe dinner," he said, without looking up. "Rescheduled for Friday. Tell them Thursday." "You have the Mercer sit down Thursday," Bosco said. "Then move the Mercer sit down. Mercer's been moved twice. Then he'll appreciate the consistency." Dante set the tablet face down on the seat beside him. "What's the Kostov situation?" "Quiet. Which is why I don't like it. Quiet means they're thinking. Quiet means they're planning." Dante looked out the window. The rain was coming down in sheets now, bending the streetlights, making the whole city look like it was underwater. He'd grown up in Chicago. He'd learned to read it the way you learn to read a person. The small tells, the micro-expressions, the things that mean nothing on their own and everything together. Right now the city felt like it was holding its breath. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. "We've got a tail on a white cargo van coming off West Monroe," the voice on the line said. It was Reyes, his street operations coordinator, calling from the second Escalade. "Plates are ghost, 3 men inside. They just grabbed someone from the level 3 parking structure. Female, unconscious." Dante didn't move for a moment, just looked at the rain. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Because 2 of the men in that van have been seen at Kostov functions in the last 6 weeks. Now he set the phone down on the seat and looked at Bosco. Bosco was already on the radio. The intercept happened on South Wabash, 6 blocks from the van's apparent route toward the interstate. Dante's people didn't do it cleanly. Nothing at that speed, in that rain, with civilians on the street could be done cleanly. The lead Escalade cut across 2 lanes and T-boned the van against a concrete barrier with enough force to deploy airbags and shatter the driver's side window. The rear Escalade blocked egress. Men in dark gear were out of both vehicles before the van stopped rocking. 4 seconds, start to finish. Dante stepped out of the Mercedes into the rain without a jacket, which was either calm or arrogance depending on how you looked at it. His shoes hit a puddle, and he didn't break stride. The 2 kidnappers who'd been in the back of the van were already face down on the wet asphalt. Bosco's men worked fast and weren't gentle about it. The driver had tried to run and made it approximately 12 feet before someone clotheslined him into a parked car. The van's rear doors were open. Dante walked around to them. She was on the floor of the van in a crumpled position that looked wrong, the position of something dropped rather than laid down. Dark hair across her face. A thin coat, the wrong coat for November in Chicago, torn at the shoulder. Her wrists were already bound with zip ties that had cut into the skin. She was breathing. He could see that much. Shallow and slow, still under whatever they'd given her, but breathing. One of his men, a kid named Callum, who was newer to this work than the rest and still flinched at things the others didn't, was already cutting the zip ties with a folding knife. Dante watched him work. Then he looked at the 3 men on the ground. "Who sent you?" he said. Not a question. The tone didn't have room for it to be a question. The driver, bleeding from a cut above his eye, said nothing. Dante nodded slowly. He crouched down so he was eye level with the man. The rain soaked through his shirt, and he didn't seem to notice. "I'm going to ask you once more," he said, "and I want you to understand something. I'm not asking because I need the information. I already know. I'm asking because the answer you give me is going to determine what the next 6 hours look like for you." The driver looked at him for a long moment, then he looked away. Dante stood up. "Put them in the truck, separately." He turned back to the van. The girl was starting to come around. Small movements, her fingers pressing against the van floor, her head turning slightly. Callum had gotten the zip ties off and was holding her wrists with awkward carefulness, the way someone holds something they're afraid of damaging further. "Easy," Dante said. She flinched at his voice. "You're out of the van," he said, keeping it flat, factual. No warmth or false reassurance in it, because false reassurance is its own kind of condescension. "You're not restrained. Nobody here is going to hurt you." She opened her eyes. Brown, dark brown, almost black in the low light. They moved fast, taking in the van, the rain, the men in dark gear, the concrete barrier, Dante standing 2 feet away with his shirt soaked through and his expression neutral in the way that could mean safety or could mean danger, and she was not yet in a state to tell the difference. Her mouth moved. Nothing came out. "Take your time," he said. "Where—" She stopped, swallowed. The chloroform hangover was visible in the way she moved, careful and fragile, like a person trying to navigate through glass. "Where are they?" "Contained." She pushed herself up to sitting and immediately grabbed the van's wheel well to keep from tipping sideways. Callum moved to help her, and she recoiled from his hand with a sharpness that made him step back. "Don't," she said. He stepped back. Dante registered that. Filed it. "Can you walk?" he said. She looked at him for a long moment, assessing. Whatever she was looking for in his face, danger, calculation, a different kind of threat, she apparently didn't find it or found enough of it and decided to gamble anyway. "Yes," she said. She was lying. He could tell by the way she stood up and immediately had to lock her knees to stay upright, the way the color left her face in a wave. But she didn't ask for help and he didn't offer it, and she made it out of the van and onto the street without falling, which was its own kind of statement. In the car, once they were moving, Bosco ran her name through 3 separate databases in under 4 minutes. Lyra Ashcombe, 24, current address listed as the Ashcombe family residence in Lincoln Park, a property assessed at $8.3 million. Father: Magnus Ashcombe, founder of Ashcombe Capital Management, net worth estimated in the high 9 figures, prominent donor to approximately a dozen civic institutions. Mother: deceased 11 years prior. Stepmother. Renata Ashcombe, née Holloway, former board member of two Ashcombe-affiliated charitable foundations. No criminal record, no reported incidents, no flag of any kind in any system Bosco could access, and Bosco could access more than most. Rich family, Bosco said. I can see that, Dante said. She should have private security. She should. They both looked at her. She was in the rear seat beside Dante, pressed against the door on her side, her arms wrapped around herself. Not crying, not talking, just watching the city go by through the rain-blurred window with an expression that Dante couldn't quite categorize. Not relief, not quite. Something more complicated than relief. Something that looked like a person doing arithmetic. He was already reaching for his phone to call the contact number Bosco had pulled for the Ashcombe residence when she spoke. Don't. Her voice was steadier than he expected. The chloroform fog had lifted faster than it should have. Or maybe she was just practiced at pushing through things. He looked at her. Don't call them, she said. Your family is going to be... Don't. Her jaw tightened. Please. And then, quieter, almost too quiet to hear over the rain against the windows. Please don't send me back. The car was quiet for a moment. Bosco glanced in the rearview mirror. Dante set his phone down on the seat. Explain, he said. She turned her head and looked at him. Really looked at him. The kind of look that costs something, that requires a person to make a decision about how much of themselves to expose to a stranger. And he saw it then. Not fear of the men who'd taken her. Something older than that. Something that had been there long before tonight. I can't, she said. Not yet. Not until I know... She stopped, started again. If you send me back tonight, I won't be alive by morning. That's a serious claim. I know what it is. He studied her. The cop he'd never become and the criminal he'd spent 2 decades being were both doing the same math. There was no performance in her, no calculation. She wasn't working an angle. She was too exhausted to work an angle. What he saw on her face was something he recognized from a long time ago. The particular look of someone who has run out of other options and has arrived at the last door and is not sure it's going to open. Bosco, he said. The penthouse on Lakeshore. I know what it is. Is it clean? A pause. We can have it clean in an hour. Dante looked at the woman across from him. She was watching him with those dark eyes, very still now, the way prey animals go still when they're deciding whether the thing in front of them is going to eat them. You don't have to tell me anything tonight, he said. You're going to a secure location. You'll have a room, food, medical attention for those wrists. Nobody outside this car is going to know where you are. She blinked. Something moved across her face that wasn't relief and wasn't gratitude exactly. It was more like the expression of someone who has heard a door click open in a room they'd been locked inside for a very long time and doesn't quite believe what they're hearing. Why would you do that? She said. It was a fair question. He didn't have a clean answer for it, and he'd learned long ago not to dress up uncertain motivations in certain language. Because 3 men who work for someone who is trying very hard to be a problem for me just abducted you, he said. Which means whatever your situation is, it's now adjacent to mine. I don't leave things adjacent. I address them. That's not a human reason, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she turned back to the rain-blurred window, and he saw her reflection in the glass. The profile of a woman who had been something less than a person for a very long time, who was beginning, slowly, to do the math on what it might feel like to be something more. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to. The penthouse on Lakeshore was on the 28th floor of a building that Dante owned through 2 shell companies and an offshore trust, and it was, in the operative sense of the word, clean. No recording equipment, no outside communication beyond a single landline, no staff who hadn't been with him for at least 6 years. Bosco's people had it ready in 50 minutes, which was Bosco at his best. A woman named Petra, who had the bearing of a retired army medic and the bedside manner to match, looked at Lyra's wrists and the bruise forming along her jawline where she'd hit the van floor and said nothing that wasn't medically necessary. She cleaned, she dressed, she left. Lyra sat at the kitchen island and drank a glass of water and didn't eat the food that had been set out, and Dante sat across from her and didn't push. At some point after 2 in the morning, she said, How long can I stay here? As long as it takes to figure out what we're dealing with, he said. You don't know what you're dealing with. Not yet. It's worse than you think. Most things are, he said. She looked at the water glass, turned it in her hands. My father is going to come looking for me. I expect so. He has a lot of resources. So do I. She looked up at him. And for just a moment, something shifted in her expression. Not hope exactly, but the shadow of something that had once been hope and might, under different conditions, become it again. You should know, she said, that there are things I haven't told you, things I'm not going to tell you tonight. I know. And when I do tell you, you might not want to help me anymore. Dante looked at her steadily. I've been in this city for 20 years, he said. There is almost nothing you could tell me that would surprise me. She nodded slowly. Then she stood up from the island and walked toward the hallway that led to the bedroom Petra had prepared, and at the doorway she stopped. The men who took me tonight, she said, without turning around. My father hired them. The hallway was quiet for a moment. I know, Dante said. She turned then and looked at him across the kitchen with those dark, exhausted eyes. How? She said. Because the kidnappers were Kostov men, he said. And Viktor Kostov doesn't do business with anyone without a referral. Someone with connections introduced them to your father. And the only person in this city with both the connections and the motive is someone I'm going to be speaking with very soon. She held his gaze for a long moment. He's going to say I'm unstable, she said. He's going to say I have a history of mental illness. He's going to say I hurt myself in fabricated stories. Her voice was flat, not bitter, just flat. The way the voice of someone goes flat after they've said a true thing so many times and been disbelieved so many times that the emotion has been worn clean out of it. He's very good at it. He's been doing it for years. I don't care what he says, Dante said. Everyone cares what he says. I'm not everyone. She looked at him for one more second. Then she turned and walked down the hallway, and the door at the end of it closed quietly, and Dante sat alone in the kitchen of a penthouse he owned through shell companies and offshore trusts, and listened to the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and thought about a man named Magnus Ashcombe. He pulled out his phone. He pulled up everything Bosco had sent, the surface layer, the public record, the donated millions, and the board seats, and the magazine profiles, and the civic awards. And he read through all of it slowly and carefully, the way you read something when you're not reading it for what it says, but for what it doesn't say. And in the silence between the facts, in the gaps between the curated public record of a respected man, Dante Vescari began to hear something. Not silence. Something was hiding inside the silence. By the time the city outside the windows had gone from black to dark gray to the first grudging suggestion of dawn, he had made 2 phone calls and sent 4 messages and begun pulling threads that he suspected, once pulled, were not going to stop unraveling. His phone buzzed once more before he put it away. A text from a number he didn't recognize. She belongs to us. Return her before this becomes something neither of us wants. Dante looked at the message for a long moment. Then he set the phone face down on the counter and walked to the window and looked out at the city coming slowly, reluctantly, into morning light. Somewhere in Lincoln Park, a man named Magnus Ashcombe was waking up, was reaching for his phone, was beginning to understand that the arrangement he had made, the careful, expensive, deniable arrangement, had not gone as planned. And in the bedroom down the hall, a woman who had asked to not be sent home was sleeping for what Dante suspected was the first time in a very long time without one ear listening for the door. He didn't know yet what she was going to tell him. He didn't know yet the full shape of what Magnus Ashcombe had done, or for how long, or how deeply the city's infrastructure of money and influence and charitable goodwill had been used to bury it. But he knew this. The text on his phone was a mistake. Not because it was threatening. Dante Vescari had received threats from men considerably more dangerous than whoever had sent that message. It was a mistake because it told him something the sender hadn't intended to reveal. It told him they were afraid. And afraid men, in Dante's long experience, always moved too fast. He turned from the window and picked up his phone and called Bosco. Pull everything on Magnus Ashcombe, he said. Not the public record, everything underneath it. Business records, property transfers, employee turnover, lawsuit settlements, NDAs, everything. I want it by tonight." "That'll take some digging," Bosco said. "Then start digging." He hung up. Outside, Chicago ground its way into another gray morning, indifferent and enormous and full of things happening in rooms where no one was supposed to be watching. Dante Vescari was watching. Bosco put the first file on the table at 6:14 in the evening. It was a physical file, actual paper, printed and flagged with colored tabs. The way Bosco did things when he wanted Dante to understand that what he was looking at was not preliminary, not speculative, but confirmed. He had people for this. Former federal investigators who had left government service for reasons that were never fully explained and who now operated in the gray geography between legal and not, doing the kind of research that left no digital footprint because it was done mostly by people talking to other people in parking garages and coffee shops and through intermediaries who knew intermediaries. Dante was at the dining table of the Lakeshore penthouse with his second coffee of the afternoon going cold beside him. Lyra was down the hall. He hadn't seen her since morning. He opened the file. Bosco stood across the table with his arms crossed and said nothing for a long moment, which was how Bosco communicated that what was inside was going to be unpleasant. It was. The first section was employee records, not the official HR documentation that Ashcombe Capital Management kept on file. Those were clean, naturally, the kind of clean that costs money to maintain. These were informal accounts, reconstructed from interviews with 6 former household staff members conducted over the last 14 hours by 2 of Bosco's people working separately so they couldn't calibrate their stories against each other. 3 had refused to speak on record. 2 had spoken briefly and then stopped. One woman, a former housekeeper who had worked the Lincoln Park residence for 3 years and had left abruptly without severance, had talked for 40 minutes and then asked that nothing she said ever be connected to her name. The accounts didn't align in every detail, but they aligned in the ways that mattered. Dante read through them without expression. He turned pages slowly, stopping at certain passages, going back. Bosco watched him do it. "The NDAs," Dante said, 11 of them that we've confirmed, probably more. Most of the staff from the last 8 years signed something when they left. The payout amounts are sealed, but the existence of the agreements isn't. They're referenced in Ashcombe Capital's legal expenses as a line item under corporate risk management. Corporate risk management. That's what they called it. Dante turned another page. A photograph. Not a crime scene photograph. Nothing that official. But a photograph taken by one of the household staff approximately 4 years prior on a personal phone, apparently without intent to use it for anything, and then kept because once you take a photograph of something like that, you don't quite know what to do with it. It showed the back hallway of the Lincoln Park residence. It showed Lyra Ashcombe from behind, in a t-shirt, climbing the stairs. The bruising across her upper back was visible even in the poor light of a hallway photograph taken on a mid-range phone. He closed the file. Not because he was done, because he needed a moment in which he was not looking at it. "The kidnapping logistics," he said. "Kostov was contracted through an intermediary we've traced back to a shell company with a registered address in Delaware. The company was incorporated 18 months ago. Its sole listed director is a man named Theodore Price, who is a junior associate at a law firm that handles approximately 40% of Ashcombe Capital's legal work. So the trail goes through the lawyer. The trail goes through the lawyer." Dante stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the lake. The water was gray and agitated, the same color as the sky, the horizon line invisible between them. "They weren't going to ransom her," he said. It was not a question. "The van was headed for a private airfield in Gary. We confirmed the flight plan this morning. A chartered aircraft, filed under a different name, destination Nassau. There's a property in the Bahamas registered to a holding company that traces back through 4 layers to a man named Dietrich Robb." Bosco paused. "Robb has prior arrests in 2 European countries for trafficking-related offenses. Both cases were dropped before trial." The room was quiet. "She's 24 years old," Dante said. "Yes." He didn't say anything else for a moment. Outside, a cargo ship was moving slowly across the gray water toward the port, massive and unhurried, indifferent to weather. "Find me everything on Robb," he said, "and I want to know who inside Ashcomb's circle knew about the Nassau property. Not guesses. Names with documentation. That's going to take a few days." "You have two." He turned from the window, and that was when Lyra appeared in the hallway entrance, which he hadn't heard her approach, and from the look on her face she had been standing there long enough to have heard the last portion of the conversation. She was dressed in clothes Petra had sourced the previous night. Plain dark jeans, a gray sweater, both slightly too large for her in a way that made her look younger than 24. Her wrists were wrapped. The bruise along her jaw had darkened overnight from dull red to purple. Her eyes went from Bosco to the file on the table to Dante. "Nassau," she said. Her voice was level, that flat, affect-stripped tone he'd noticed the night before. "Sit down," Dante said. "I'm not going to—" "Lyra!" He said her name deliberately, not unkindly, and something in it made her stop. "Sit down, please." She came to the table. She sat down across from where the file was, but she didn't look at it. "You knew about Nassau?" Dante said. A long pause. "I didn't know the name," she said. "I knew there was a plan. I overheard a conversation, my father and a man I didn't recognize, about 6 weeks ago, in his study. I wasn't supposed to be on that floor." She paused again. "I couldn't hear everything, just enough to understand that I was the subject of the conversation, and that whatever they were discussing had a date attached to it." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Bosco said. She looked at him, not with anger exactly, more with the patience of someone explaining something for what feels like the 100th time. "My father donated $400,000 to the superintendent's campaign fund," she said. "He has the home number of 3 federal prosecutors. He served on the mayor's economic advisory board for 6 years. She picked up the water glass that had been left on the table and turned it in her hands, the same gesture as the night before, restless and controlled at the same time. "The last time I tried to tell someone, I was 19, a counselor at a private clinic my stepmother enrolled me in. Within 72 hours, my father had spoken to the clinic's board of directors. The counselor had been reassigned, and I had a new diagnosis in my file that made everything I said going forward a symptom of something rather than a fact about something." The room absorbed that. "What diagnosis?" Dante said. She smiled. There was nothing warm in it. "Delusional disorder with paranoid features. Isn't that something?" She set the glass down. "Chichi, it's a very useful diagnosis if you're trying to make sure no one believes a person." Dante looked at her steadily. Then he looked at Bosco. "Add the clinic records to the pull," he said, "and find the counselor." Bosco nodded once and left the room. The first call from the Ashcombe lawyers came that morning at 9:47, while Lyra was still asleep and Dante was on his second call of the day with his own legal team. He let it go to his coordinator, a woman named Sylvie, who had been managing Dante's communications for 8 years and had a genius for being politely impenetrable. The attorney's name was Harlan Cross, senior partner at Meridian and Cross, and he did not waste time on pleasantries. "My client is extremely concerned about the whereabouts of his daughter," Cross said, in the tone of a man who was using the word concerned to mean something closer to furious. "She was reported missing to police last night. If there is any information you have regarding her location—" "Mr. Vescari has no information to provide at this time," Sylvie said. "I want to be very clear," Cross said. "Any individual found to be harboring a vulnerable adult against the wishes of her family could be facing—" "I'll let him know you called," Sylvie said, and disconnected. Dante read the transcript of the call over his afternoon coffee and underlined the phrase vulnerable adult and set the paper aside. By midday, 2 things happened that he had expected and one that he hadn't. The first expected thing was that Cross called twice more, each time with escalating language and decreasing subtlety. By the third call, there was mention of an emergency guardianship petition, which Dante's lawyers told him was legally questionable but would require response and would generate paperwork and court filings that were public record and would establish, in print, that Lyra Ashcombe was being characterized by her family as someone who required guardianship rather than someone who had survived an abduction. "He's building the narrative fast," his lead attorney, a compact woman named Farida who had a mind like a steel trap and a tolerance for Dante's operational methods that was not unconditional but was extensive, told him over the phone. If they can get a court to appoint Magnus as her legal guardian, even temporarily, it changes the situation significantly. She loses standing. Everything she says becomes filtered through him. How fast can they move on that? Depends on which judge they file with. Can we block it? We can challenge it. To block it, we'd need Lyra to make a statement on record, through her own independent counsel, establishing capacity and volition. She'd need her own attorney, unconnected to you. I'm aware of that. Dante. Farida paused. I need to know what the actual situation is, because what I'm helping you navigate right now looks from the outside like, I know what it looks like from the outside. Then tell me what it looks like from the inside. He told her. Not everything. Not the file, not the housekeeper's account, not the photograph, but enough. She was quiet on the other end for longer than she usually was quiet. If what you're describing is accurate, she said finally, then there are victim advocacy attorneys who specialize in exactly this. I can make a call. Make it, he said. The second expected thing was that private security contractors, 2 vehicles, good equipment, rotating intervals, appeared on Lakeshore Drive within sight of the building's parking entrance sometime before noon, not moving, not making any approach, just present, making themselves visible. It was a message, not an operation, and Dante read it as such and told Bosco to document their plates and shifts and say nothing. The unexpected thing was the attempt on the building. It happened at 4:18 p.m. Not a frontal approach. Whoever planned it wasn't stupid. It came through the building's HVAC maintenance access, a service entrance on the building's north side that was supposed to require a key card registered to the building management company. Someone had a duplicate. One man, moving fast and knowing where he was going, which meant he'd had the building plans and had probably been inside before on some pretext. Bosco's man on the service corridor caught him 1 floor below the penthouse. The man was carrying a phone and a syringe. Not a weapon. A syringe. The kind of thing designed to leave no visible mark, to make whatever happened look like a medical event rather than what it was. Dante got the call from Bosco 12 minutes later. He's contained, Bosco said. He's not talking. He doesn't need to talk, Dante said. I need to know who hired him. We're working on it. Work faster. He stood in the kitchen of the penthouse for a moment after he hung up and felt something he didn't usually feel, a cold, specific kind of anger that was different from the operational calculation he normally brought to problems. He was not a man who confused the personal with the professional, as a rule. He'd built his entire operation on the discipline of not doing that. But there was a woman with wrapped wrists and a fabricated psychiatric diagnosis sitting down the hall, and someone had just sent a man with a syringe to the floor below them, and the anger that moved through Dante Viscari in that moment was not entirely professional. He went to the hallway and knocked on her door. Yeah, she said. He opened it. She was on the bed, sitting cross-legged, a book open on her lap that she clearly hadn't been reading. She looked at his face and closed the book. What happened? She said. There was an incident in the building. It's been handled. He kept his voice level. Are you all right? I heard something. Her eyes were steady. 20 minutes ago. A thud somewhere below. I thought... She stopped. I didn't come out. That was the right call. Was it him? My father? I don't have confirmation yet. It was him. Not a question. He doesn't wait. When he decides something, he does it immediately. He's never been patient. She looked down at her hands. I used to think that was the worst thing about him. The speed of it. You'd barely have time to understand what was happening before it was already done. Dante looked at her for a moment. I need to tell you something, he said. Okay. My people found information today about an airfield in Gary, a flight. A man named Dietrich Robb who owns a property in the Bahamas. She went very still. You know that name, he said. Robb. Her voice came out different, flatter, quieter. He came to dinner twice, this year. He and my father went into the study both times. I wasn't allowed near that wing of the house when Robb was there. She paused. I thought he was a business associate. He wasn't. Another pause, longer. No, she said. I suppose he wasn't. She looked at the window. The sun was going down over the lake, turning the water copper, and then dark. So my father wasn't just trying to get rid of me. No, he was selling me. Dante didn't answer because it didn't require an answer. She sat with it for a moment. He watched her face and saw something happen there that he had no clean word for. Not breakdown, not explosion, something quieter and more devastating than either of those. The specific expression of a person absorbing a truth they had suspected and spent years hoping they were wrong about. "Okay," she said, barely audible. "Lyra, I'm okay." Her voice came out of somewhere deeper than her chest. Just give me a minute." He stood in the doorway and gave her the minute. When she looked up, her eyes were dry. Not because she wasn't feeling it. He could see she was feeling it in every line of her. But because she had apparently been practicing not showing it for long enough that the practice had become reflex. "What do you need from me?" she said. "I need you to meet with an attorney tomorrow. Not mine. Your own. Independent. I'm going to have Farida arrange it." "Why?" "Because your father is filing papers to have himself appointed your legal guardian on the grounds that you're not competent to make your own decisions." She laughed. A short, ugly sound. "Of course he is," she said. "The attorney can help you get ahead of it, but she'll need a statement from you about the situation. All of it, as much as you can give. And if I do that, it becomes a public record. Some of it, yes." She nodded slowly. "He'll come after me harder." "Yes." "And you?" She looked up at him. "If this gets loud, lawyers, filings, public record, your name gets attached to this. You're already someone the city is watching. Adding a missing heiress to your list of problems is not." "I'm aware of what it is." "Then why?" "Because I cut the zip ties on your wrists last night," Dante said, "and someone just sent a man with a syringe to a floor below where you're sleeping, and I don't leave things unfinished." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's still not a human reason," she said. "Maybe not," he said. "Shamshab." The call came at 11 that night. Not from the lawyers this time, not filtered through Sylvie or through any of the channels that could be managed or intercepted or documented. From Magnus Ashcombe himself, direct to Dante's personal number, which was not listed anywhere and which Magnus Ashcombe should not have had. Dante looked at the number for one full ring before he answered. "Mr. Vescari." The voice was what Dante had expected from the photographs and the file, composed, deep, the voice of someone who had been listened to for so long he no longer considered the possibility of not being listened to. "I think it's past time we spoke directly." "I agree," Dante said. "You have something of mine. I have a 24-year-old woman in a secure location who asked not to be returned to you." A pause. Not a surprised pause. A calculated one. The kind a person takes when they're deciding which version of themselves to show next. "My daughter," Magnus said, "has a long history of instability. I don't expect you to know this. You don't know her. But I've spent years trying to get her the help she needs, and she has spent those same years running from it. This is not the first time she's made alarming accusations. It won't be the last." "Tell me about Dietrich Robb," Dante said. The pause this time was different in quality, shorter and harder. "I don't know who you're—" "Tell me about the airfield in Gary, the charter flight, the property in Nassau." The line was quiet for 3 full seconds. "You're making a very significant mistake," Magnus Ashcombe said, and the composure was still there in the voice, but something underneath it had changed. Some structural element had shifted, the way a building shifts when the foundation gets water in it. "I make mistakes occasionally," Dante said. "This isn't one of them. You're a man with a complicated relationship with the law, Mr. Vescari. I don't think you want the kind of scrutiny that—" "Bring the scrutiny," Dante said. "Bring all of it. I want to be very clear about something. I'm going to pull on every thread connected to your name until the entire thing unravels. Your business arrangements, your legal history, your NDAs, your relationship with Dietrich Robb, every property transfer and offshore account, and sealed settlement. I'm going to find every person who signed a document to keep your secrets, and I am going to give them a reason to stop keeping them." He paused. "And I am going to protect your daughter while I do it." Another silence. "She's not a victim," Magnus said, and his voice had gone very quiet. "She's a liability, and liabilities have a way of—" Good night, Mr. Ashcombe, Dante said, and ended the call. He set the phone on the counter. Bosco was in the kitchen doorway, having come in from the outer room, and he looked at Dante with the expression he wore when he was calculating odds. That's war, Bosco said. Yes, Dante said. He's got more political cover than anyone we've moved against in the last 5 years. Judges, prosecutors, the commissioner's office. I know. Our operation doesn't need this kind of exposure right now. The Kostov situation is still Bosco. Dante looked at him. I know what I'm doing. Bosco held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who has followed someone long enough to know that arguing is a different thing than being wrong. I'll beef up the detail, he said. Do it tonight. Bosco left. Dante stood alone in the kitchen. Through the window, the city was a field of light under a black sky, immense and indifferent, moving through its midnight business the way it always did, without reference to any single thing happening inside it, without pausing for the things that were about to change. His phone lit up on the counter. A text from Bosco, sent from the other room. The man from the maintenance corridor. He talked. Dante picked up the phone and read the rest of the message. Then he put it down slowly. Because the name Bosco had sent him, the name the man had given as the person who'd hired him, the person who'd sourced the building plans and the duplicate keycard and the syringe, was not Magnus Ashcombe. It was Renata, the stepmother, who had moved independently of Magnus, who had not waited for the lawyers or the guardianship petition or the next negotiated step, which meant the two of them were not working in concert, which meant there were two separate people in the Ashcombe household who wanted Lyra. Ashcombe silenced, for reasons that might not be identical, moving on separate timelines, and neither of them knew what the Dante read the text a second time. Then he walked down the hall and knocked on Lyra's door. I need you awake, he said through the door. Now. A pause. Then the sound of movement. The door opened. She was still dressed. She hadn't slept, or had tried and given up. And she read his face the way someone reads weather, fast and instinctively, and whatever she saw there made her step back from the door to let him in without asking why. He came in and sat in the chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed. The city moved in the glass behind him, distant and lit and irrelevant. Tell me about Renata, he said. Something shifted in her face. Not surprise. Something more like the specific weariness of a person arriving at a topic they have been circling for years. What about her? Everything. Start from the beginning. She looked at her hands, the wrapped wrists, then she looked up and started talking. Renata Ashcombe had come into the household when Lyra was 13, 2 years after her mother died. She had arrived with the precision of something planned. A charity event introduction, a 3-month courtship conducted almost entirely in public venues where being seen together meant something. A marriage that was announced in the Tribune Society pages with a photograph of Magnus looking distinguished and Renata looking like exactly what she was, a woman who understood that proximity to power was its own form of power. She was 47 now. She had the groomed, maintained look of someone who treated her appearance as a professional obligation. She served on the boards of 2 foundations. She appeared at every public event beside Magnus with the coordinated ease of someone who had rehearsed the role thoroughly enough that it no longer felt like a role. Lyra had understood within the first 6 months what Renata was. Not a stepmother in any functional sense, not an adversary in any direct sense, something more specific and more insidious, a co-architect. Someone who had looked at Magnus Ashcombe's household and understood its internal mechanics precisely and had chosen to make herself useful to those mechanics rather than challenge them. She had never hit Lyra. She wanted that on record, internally, the way certain people construct their own defense inside their heads long before they need it externally. She had never raised her voice. What she had done was more structural. The quiet redirection of information, the management of what was visible and what wasn't, the careful curation of which version of Lyra reached the outside world. She had been the one to select the clinic at 19. She had been the one to sit across from the admitting psychiatrist and describe, in measured and compassionate language, a daughter struggling with paranoid delusions and an inability to maintain stable relationships, all while Lyra sat beside her and felt the floor of reality tilt slightly under her feet. She had been the one to brief the household staff. to manage the NDAs, to maintain the architecture of normalcy that made the Lincoln Park residence look, from any external vantage, like what it claimed to be. And she had done all of it not out of love for Magnus, Lyra had come to understand. Or not only that, she had done it because the structure served her, because the access and the money and the insulation from consequence that came with being Renata Ashcombe required that certain things stay buried, and she was very good at keeping things buried. Did she know about Rob? Dante said. Lyra stopped. I don't know, she said. Think. She thought about it, turned it over. Her eyes moved slightly the way they did when she was running through memory, sequence by sequence. The second dinner, she said slowly, when Rob came. Magnus told me to stay on the third floor, but Renata, I saw her on the landing when Rob arrived. She greeted him. Not the way you greet a stranger, the way you greet someone you've spoken to before, on the phone maybe, where you know the voice before you know the face. She paused. She knew him. Dante looked at her for a moment. She moved independently of your father tonight, he said, the man who came through the maintenance corridor. He worked for Renata, not Magnus. Lyra processed this. He watched her do it, the slight contraction around her eyes, the way her jaw shifted. She panicked, Lyra said quietly. Magnus would have used lawyers first. He always uses lawyers first. He likes distance between himself and anything direct. Renata. She doesn't like loose ends. She never has. She looked at Dante. She didn't do it for him. She did it for herself. What does she have to lose independently of Magnus? Everything, Lyra said. The foundations, the board seats. She's built her entire identity on being his wife. If he goes down, she goes down with him. But if she can... She stopped. The arithmetic was moving across her face. If she can silence me before I talk, Magnus doesn't go down, and she stays exactly where she is. She didn't think your father would succeed, Dante said, with the lawyers, with the guardianship. She decided not to wait. She never waits when she's afraid. He nodded slowly. He stood up from the chair. Get some sleep if you can, he said. What are you going to do? Right now? Think. He moved toward the door. Tomorrow you're meeting with an attorney named Claire Vaux. Farida arranged it. She's going to record your statement. Everything. Your father, Renata, the clinic, all of it. And then? And then it becomes part of a formal legal record that is considerably harder to make disappear than a person. She nodded. Then, as he reached the door, Dante. He stopped. Two of them, she said, moving separately, not coordinating. A pause. Doesn't that mean... Yes, he said. It means they're more dangerous, not less. Separately, they're unpredictable. He turned and looked at her. Which is why you don't leave this floor without Petra or Bosco. For any reason. Understood? She held his gaze. Understood, she said. The morning came in gray and cold, and Claire Vaux arrived at 9 a.m. exactly, which told Dante something about her before she said a word. She was Vietnamese-American, mid-30s, with the compact alert energy of someone who ran on 4 hours of sleep and considered that a personal achievement. She specialized in civil cases involving institutional abuse and had won 4 significant settlements against organizations that had very good lawyers and had expected to win. Farida had described her as relentless. Dante had said good. He left them in the living room, Claire, Lyra, and a legal recorder, and went to the second bedroom where Bosco had set up a working operations table and where, over the course of the morning, a sequence of things arrived that began to change the shape of everything. The first was the identity of the man from the maintenance corridor. His name was Goran Steele, and he had a history as a private contractor who moved between security work and less classifiable work depending on what the market offered. And his phone, cracked by one of Bosco's people who had specific skills in that area, contained 3 calls to a number registered to a private events company called Holloway Occasions, which was wholly owned by Renata Ashcombe under her maiden name. The second was a report from the investigator who'd spent 48 hours tracking the financial architecture underneath Ashcombe Capital Management. It was 40 pages, and Dante read all of it, and the relevant passage was on page 23, where the investigator had found, embedded within a series of charitable foundation transactions over a period of 6 years, a recurring transfer pattern that pointed to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands that was not registered to Magnus Ashcombe. It was registered to Renata, a separate account, her own. Funded through the foundation she managed, which were funded in turn by Ashcombe Capital, which meant she had been quietly diverting money, not large amounts, never large enough to trigger an audit flag, but consistent and disciplined over 6 years, into a structure that was entirely independent of her husband. She has an exit, Bosco said. She's been building one for 6 years, Dante said. So she's not doing this to protect him. No, Dante set down the report. She's doing this to protect the exit. If the Ashcombe structure collapses under scrutiny, someone is going to look at the foundation accounts. If someone looks at the foundation accounts with the right questions, they find the transfers. If they find the transfers, the exit goes with it. She's been stealing from him. Preparing, Dante said. She's been preparing. Bosco was quiet for a moment. That means she's planning to leave him. At some point, when the terms suited her. And Lyra is the variable she can't control. Lyra is the reason anyone starts looking in the first place. Dante stood up and rolled down his sleeves and buttoned the cuffs with careful attention, the way he did when his mind was working on something. She doesn't care what happens to Magnus. She never did. She cares about the 6 years of money and the door it opens. They sat with this for a moment. We've been thinking about this as a father protecting himself, Dante said. It's not that. Or not only that. We have 2 people with 2 completely different things to lose, using the same target to protect themselves. He picked up his coffee. Which means even if we neutralize Magnus, Renata keeps moving, and vice versa. Bosco's phone buzzed. He read it. His face did something it rarely did. What? Dante said. The Attorney General's office, Bosco said slowly. They've filed a motion this morning to grant Magnus Ashcombe emergency guardianship of Lyra on the grounds of psychological incapacity. He looked up. They got a judge to sign it 40 minutes ago. Dante went very still. Which judge? Bosco told him the name. Dante recognized it. He set down his coffee very carefully on the table. He can't enforce it here, Bosco said, not without knowing where here is. But if Lyra surfaces anywhere, if Claire Vaux files her statement through standard channels, if anyone attaches her name to a court document in the next 12 hours, Magnus can use it to take custody. Legally, yes. Which means Claire's statement can't go through standard channels yet. Which means we have nothing we can use without exposing her. Dante walked to the window. The lake was flat and dark today. No wind, no movement, as if the water itself was waiting. Farida called 40 seconds later as if she'd been watching the clock. You've seen it, she said. I've seen it. The guardianship is legally thin. It won't survive a challenge. But to challenge it, Lyra needs to appear in person or through independent counsel making a formal filing, and the moment she does that, Magnus knows where she is, or gets enough information to find out. Yes. A pause. Dante, this judge has been in Magnus's pocket for at least 3 years. I know this. I cannot say it on record, but I know it, which means any filing we make goes in front of someone who is not going to rule fairly. Then we need a different court. Federal jurisdiction would bypass him. But to get federal jurisdiction, we need a federal claim. And to establish a federal claim, we need the trafficking connection to Rob documented and filed with federal investigators, not just in our possession. How long? If I call in every favor I have and we move tonight? 24 hours. Maybe. And in 24 hours, Magnus can move her if he finds her. Yes. He ended the call. He stood at the window for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked back down the hall and opened the living room door. Claire Vaux looked up. Lyra looked up. Both of them read his face. We have a problem, he said. He told them cleanly and without softening it, because there wasn't time to soften it, and because Lyra had made clear in every interaction over the last 18 hours that she was not someone who needed things softened. She listened to all of it without expression. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. So if I file anything, he knows where I am, she said. Yes. And if I don't file anything, The guardianship stands. Temporarily, we can challenge it, but the judge is his. Yes. She looked at Claire Vaux. Claire Vaux looked back at her with the expression of someone doing complex math and not loving the result. There's something else, Lyra said. Her voice had gone to that flat register again, the one that meant she was managing something large and doing it mostly internally. You said Renata has been moving independently. She sent someone last night. Yes. She'll send someone again. Yes, better this time. So I have my father filing legal papers to take custody of me, a stepmother trying to kill me before either of those papers, or I can do anything useful, and a judge who will rule however my father asks him to. She paused. And federal jurisdiction is 24 hours away. At minimum. She nodded once. Okay, she said. Then she looked at Claire. Can you file the statement under seal, directly with a federal magistrate, bypassing the state courts entirely? Claire's eyes sharpened. It's procedurally unorthodox. Can you do it? I know a magistrate in the Northern District who is scrupulously independent and has no connection to Ashcombe or anyone in his circle that I'm aware of. Claire paused. It would need to be filed in person, today, which means I leave here with your statement on a drive, and I walk into a federal building with it, and I hope that no one who is watching this building follows me. They're watching this building? Lyra looked at Dante. Since yesterday, he said. She absorbed this. Then the drive can't leave this building on foot, she said. Dante looked at her. Something in the way she said it, the specific problem-solving flatness of it, reminded him of a quality he recognized in himself, a quality you developed when you'd spent enough years in situations where panic was a luxury you couldn't afford. No, he said, it can't. So we need a different way to get it there. She looked at her hands, the wrapped wrists. Then she looked up. And we need it done before Renata makes another move, before Magnus uses the guardianship order, and before anyone outside this room knows that I'm about to give federal investigators a direct line to Dietrich Robb. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Bosco appeared in the doorway, and his face was doing the thing it had done when he read the guardianship order, the thing that meant the news was not good. The 2 vehicles on Lakeshore, he said. They've been replaced. By what? Dante said. 4 vehicles, and a man we've identified as a former federal marshal who now does private security work. He was in Magnus Ashcombe's employ as of 8 months ago. Bosco paused. He's the kind of man you hire when you're done with lawyers. The room absorbed this. He moved faster than I expected, Dante said. He found out about the federal jurisdiction play, Bosco said. Someone leaked it. Everyone in the room went still. Dante turned and looked at Bosco with an expression that contained several things simultaneously. We made 3 calls about the federal filing, Bosco said. You, Farida, Claire. He paused. And I called my contact at the Northern District to check the magistrate's availability, which I did from my phone. Your phone is clean, Dante said. My phone is clean. Bosco's voice was level. But the contact I called, I've used him twice before. He's reliable. Was reliable. The specific silence that followed was not the silence of people failing to understand what was being said. It was the silence of people understanding it completely. He sold us, Dante said. Within the hour, Bosco said. Yes. Lyra was looking at the window, the flat gray daylight. So Magnus knows we're trying to go federal, she said. Yes. And he's moved from lawyers to something else. Yes. How long before those 4 vehicles become something more active? Nobody answered, which was itself an answer. She turned from the window and looked at Dante with an expression that had something in it he hadn't seen before in all the hours since the parking garage. Not fear, and not the contained desperation of the woman who had grabbed his sleeve and whispered, "Please don't send me back." Something colder than either of those. Something that had been formed in the long years before he'd ever met her, in rooms and corridors and dinner tables that had required her to be very, very good at surviving. You can't protect me here much longer, she said. And if we try to move me, we're moving me through whatever they've put around this building. Yes, Dante said. And Renata is operating on her own timeline, which we can't predict. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then we stopped running, she said. Dante looked at her. What we've been doing, she said, is trying to protect me long enough to build a case. But the case takes time, and they're collapsing the time. She turned to Claire. You said the federal filing needs to be in person, with a magistrate. Yes. What if the magistrate came here? Claire blinked. Magistrates don't. What if we gave them a reason to? Lyra looked at Dante. Not a filing, a testimony. Live, recorded, given directly to a federal officer in a location Magnus doesn't control, with the trafficking documentation attached, with the Rob connection, with everything Bosco's people have pulled. She paused. If we can get a federal officer here into this building, the statement becomes a federal record the moment it's made. Magnus's guardianship order is worth nothing against an active federal investigation. Getting a federal officer here means exposing our location, Dante said. Our location is already compromised, she said. They have 4 vehicles outside. They know we're in this building. The only thing they don't know is exactly which unit. If we invite a federal officer in and Magnus's people see them enter, then Magnus knows we've gone federal and he moves. Her voice was steady. But he moves on a building with a federal officer inside it, which is a different calculation. Dante looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him. You've been thinking like someone hiding, she said quietly. I've spent my whole life hiding. It doesn't work. They always find the hiding place eventually. She paused. I want to stop hiding. The room was very quiet. Claire Vaux looked at Dante. Dante looked at Lyra. And he was about to answer, was forming the answer, had in fact already decided, was opening his mouth, when Bosco's radio crackled, and a voice came through it that was not one of Bosco's regular team, a voice too high and too fast from a man who was clearly moving while he spoke. North stairwell, the voice said. Level 26. We have, then a sound that was not a voice, then static. Bosco was already moving. Dante's hand was already on Bosco's arm. How many people do we have between level 26 and this floor? Dante said. Bosco's jaw was tight. 2. Were, Bosco said. Lyra stood up from her chair. She didn't make a sound. She just stood, and her face was the color of something that has been waiting for this moment for a very long time and has finally stopped being surprised by it. The roof, Dante said. What? Bosco said. Access hatch to the mechanical level. From there you can reach the adjacent building's roof through the fire bridge. Dante was already moving, already pulling on his jacket, already doing the math that the situation required. Take Lyra and Claire. Go now. I'll be behind you. Dante. Bosco. He said it the way he said things when they were not up for discussion. Go. Turusan. The north stairwell was 20 meters from the penthouse door. Dante went toward it instead of away from it, because if there were men coming up through it, he needed to know how many and how fast. And because Bosco needed 60 seconds to get Lyra and Claire to the roof access, and 60 seconds was a long time if someone was already on level 27. He moved through the penthouse corridor with a Glock 19 that had lived in the inner pocket of his jacket for 12 years, and which he had fired in the direction of human beings on 4 separate occasions in his adult life, never carelessly and never without consequence. His shoes were quiet on the hallway floor. The building's ambient noise, the ventilation system, the distant compression of elevators, the thrum of a city through 43 centimeters of reinforced glass, pressed around him. He reached the stairwell door and put his back against the wall beside it. Listened. Footsteps. 2 sets. Moving fast but not running. The careful fast of trained men who didn't want sound to precede them. Maybe 12 feet below the door, which put them on the landing between 26 and 27. He had 2 options and about 4 seconds to choose between them. He went through the door. The first man was on the top step when Dante came through, and the half-second of surprise was all the differential Dante needed. He took the man's weapon hand at the wrist, turned it outward against the joint's natural rotation, heard something give, and used the momentum of the man's own forward motion to send him into the railing hard enough to fold him over it. The gun clattered down the stairwell. The second man was 2 steps below and had better reaction time. He got his weapon up. Dante was already below the line of it, inside the arm's reach, and the stairwell was too narrow for the angle he needed, so he drove his elbow into the man's nose instead, which is a brutal and reliable thing to do to a person in a confined space. And the man's head snapped back into the concrete wall, and he went down. Dante took 3 seconds to confirm both men were down and staying down. Then he took the second man's radio and went back through the stairwell door into the corridor and moved toward the service elevator at the building's northeast corner. His hand was bleeding. He hadn't noticed when it happened. He noticed now. The edge of the second man's jacket buckle had opened a cut across his left palm, 2 inches long, not deep enough to matter but bleeding freely in the way that cuts on hands do. He closed his fist around it and kept moving. The service elevator opened. He rode it up to the mechanical level, listening to the stolen radio. 3 voices on it. English with a faint Eastern European inflection on 2 of them, clean American on the third. The third was giving orders. The third was calm. The former federal marshal. He was directing people toward the roof. Someone had told him about the fire bridge. Bosco had 60 seconds, and he used 58 of them. He moved Lyra and Claire through the penthouse with the compressed efficiency of a man who had done extractions before in conditions worse than this, and Lyra moved without being told twice and didn't ask questions because she had apparently done her own math and arrived at the same conclusion Dante had, which was that the time for questions was not now. The roof access was through a utility closet at the end of the penthouse's service corridor, a metal hatch on a hydraulic arm opening onto the mechanical level, and from there across 30 feet of rooftop infrastructure to a fire bridge that connected to the adjacent building, which was a commercial property that would be largely empty at this hour. Bosco went through the hatch first. Cold air hit him like a fist. The November rooftop, 28 floors up, the wind coming off the lake with nothing to slow it. The mechanical housing units for the building's HVAC system rose around them in dark rectangular shapes, creating channels and shadows. He helped Claire through, then Lyra. She came through the hatch without assistance, dropped onto the roof surface, and straightened up into the wind with her hair immediately going sideways and her jaw set against the cold. She looked at the fire bridge, a steel walkway, narrow, with chain-link sides, spanning the 6-foot gap between buildings. "How stable is that?" she said. "Stable enough," Bosco said. "Move." He was behind them, scanning back toward the hatch they'd come through, when the radio on his belt picked up a fragment of transmission that made his stomach do something it hadn't done in years. "They know about the bridge." He didn't say it out loud. He pushed Claire toward the bridge and said, "Go, now, don't stop." And she went. And Lyra was right behind her, and Bosco was 3 steps back watching the hatch and the far edge of the rooftop simultaneously and doing the arithmetic on how many seconds he had. He had fewer than he thought. The door on the far side of the rooftop, a maintenance access door he hadn't known was there, a detail that someone had had and he hadn't, came open, and 2 men came through it, and they were not Dante's people. Bosco pulled his weapon and put himself between the men and the bridge. "Go," he said, without turning around. "Don't stop for anything." "Bosco," Lyra said behind him. "Go, Hanta." The fire bridge was 6 feet of gap and 30 feet of walkway, and Claire made it in 8 seconds with her laptop bag slung across her body and her heels absolutely wrong for the surface and her breath coming in sharp audible pulls that she couldn't control. Lyra was 4 steps behind her. The wind at 28 floors was not the wind at street level. It was a different creature entirely, unobstructed and purposeful, pressing against the chain-link sides of the bridge and finding every gap in clothing and making the walkway sway in a way that was probably within engineering tolerances but felt catastrophically insufficient. Lyra kept her eyes on Claire's back and kept moving and didn't look down. Behind her, on the roof she'd just left, she heard 2 shots. She didn't stop. She reached the far end of the bridge and came through the gate onto the adjacent building's roof and turned. Bosco was on the bridge, moving fast. One hand on the chain link, the other hand. He was hit. She could see it in the way he was moving, the asymmetry of it, his left arm not tracking right, his shoulder dropping. He was moving anyway. He crossed the last 10 feet of the bridge and came through the gate, and she caught him, which was absurd because he outweighed her by 80 pounds. But her hands were on his jacket, and she didn't let him go down. I'm fine, he said. You're not? I'm fine. He straightened. His left shoulder was wrong in a way that she didn't look at directly. Other building has a freight elevator to the parking structure. We go down, we go out, we get to... He stopped, pressed his radio. Dante. Dante, come in. Static. Dante, Bosco said again. His voice was level, but his jaw was very tight. Static. Claire put her hand on Bosco's arm and pointed at the door that led into the building's interior. We move, she said, in a voice that was steadier than it had any right to be. We get somewhere secure, and we figure out the next step. He knows what he's doing. Bosco looked at her for 1 second. Then he looked at Lyra. Lyra was looking at the bridge. Nobody was coming across it. Move, Bosco said. They moved. Dante came through the mechanical level at a run and hit the rooftop door and came out into the cold and the wind and found the fire bridge empty and the far end of it, the adjacent building's rooftop, also empty. They'd made it. He turned. The former federal marshal was standing 12 feet away. He was a large man, 50 or so, with close-cut gray hair and the particular physical stillness of someone who spent a great deal of time being patient. He was holding a weapon, and it was pointed at Dante's center mass with the relaxed steadiness of someone who was not performing the gesture, but simply making it. 2 men flanked him, both armed, both watching Dante with the careful attention of people who had been told specifically not to underestimate him. Mr. Viscari, the marshal said. His name, Dante now knew from Bosco's report, was Trent Halley. He had 17 years with the Federal Marshal Service before his retirement and 5 years of private work after it, and he had the bearing of both. Your people are gone. Your fixer has a bullet in his shoulder. My client would like his daughter back. Dante looked at him. His hand was bleeding. He could feel it, the slow, warm persistence of it, soaking into the folded fist. His weapon was in his jacket, and the geometry of the situation made reaching for it a sequence that ended in a specific way he preferred not to end in. She's not his daughter, Dante said. She's his asset. There's a difference. That's a philosophical position, Halley said, and you're not in a philosophical position right now. What position am I in? You have 2 options. You tell me where she is, or you tell me where she is after we've had a longer conversation. He paused. I'd prefer the first. It's faster. And then what? And then you go back to your operation, and Magnus Ashcombe goes back to his. You walked into something that wasn't your business. You can walk back out. He was going to sell her to Dietrich Robb. Something moved across Halley's face. Not surprise exactly, more like a man briefly and involuntarily illuminated by something he had chosen not to look at directly. I don't know anything about that, Halley said. Now you do. A pause. Tell me where she is, Halley said. No, Dante said. Halley looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded to the man on his left. The man moved toward Dante, and Dante let him get close enough, and then he did something that was not elegant and was not clean, and that his left hand paid for in a way that made his vision go briefly white at the edges. A forced disarm at the cost of 2 of the cut's edges reopening and a rib on his left side meeting a knee with enough force to make breathing suddenly complicated. He got the man's weapon. He did not get to keep it. Halley was fast for a man his size. He closed the distance before Dante could bring the weapon up, and he was not interested in the weapon. He went for Dante's wrist and got it and twisted, and the gun went across the rooftop and over the edge. And then it was the 2 of them in the wind and the cold, with the city spread out under them in every direction, and Halley had 30 pounds and 2 functioning hands on Dante, and Dante had the specific, cold, long-burning anger of a man who had been patient for 48 hours and was done being patient. It lasted 45 seconds. At the end of it, they were both on the rooftop surface and breathing hard, and Dante had a knee on Halley's throat, and Halley had his hand on Dante's broken rib and was applying pressure with the methodical focus of someone who understood that pain was a negotiating tool. Neither of them moved. Okay, Halley said. His voice was strained but controlled. Okay. Let go, Dante said. Halley released the pressure. Dante eased the knee. They both stayed where they were for a moment, breathing. You know what he did, Dante said. Hallie's jaw was tight. The wind pressed between them. I know what I was told, Hallie said. And what were you told? That she's unstable. That she's a danger to herself. That she needs to be returned to her family for her own protection. You've seen enough people to know when you're being lied to, Dante said. A long pause. The city moved below them. I'm being paid, Hallie said. You're being used. Dante's rib was informing him very clearly about its condition, and he was setting the information aside, which was becoming harder. When this comes apart, and it is coming apart tonight, regardless of what happens on this roof, you want to be on the side of the documentation, not the side of the man who generated it. Hallie looked at him. Documentation, he said. The trafficking connection, the offshore accounts, the NDAs, all of it in the hands of a federal magistrate by morning. Dante paused. Unless the man you're working for gets there first, unless whatever Magnus Ashcombe is paying you is worth a federal obstruction charge. Another pause. Longer. You don't have a federal magistrate, Hallie said. Not yet, Dante said. The rooftop was quiet except for the wind and the distant, indifferent noise of the city. Hallie looked at him for a long time. I want the name, Hallie said. The Rob connection. In writing. Documentation I can take to a contact of my own. If it checks out, Dante said, what do I get? You get my men standing down tonight. You get 12 hours. Hallie's voice was flat and specific. After that, I can't speak for what Magnus does next. I need 24. 15. 20. 17, Hallie said. And that's not a negotiation. It's a gift. Dante looked at him. The rib made itself known again, insistently. 17 hours, he said. Write down the name, Hallie said. Bosco's people found a location 3 miles away, a property that had changed hands through one of Dante's quieter holding companies 8 months prior and had not been used for anything since. A former commercial photography studio on the 6th floor of a building in River North with blacked-out windows and a freight elevator and no connection to any name that Magnus Ashcombe's people could reasonably trace. Bosco's shoulder was a through-and-through that had missed anything structural, which was fortunate, and Petra, who had been extracted separately by Dante's third car and arrived at the River North location 40 minutes after the others, addressed it with the same wordless efficiency she brought to everything, while Bosco sat in a folding chair and was stoic in the particular way of men who consider showing pain a form of professional failure. Lyra sat across from him while Petra worked. She didn't look away. Does it hurt? She said. Yes, Bosco said, because lying would have been insulting. Thank you, she said. For the bridge. Bosco looked at her. Don't. I'm going to anyway. I don't need... I know you don't need it, she said. I need to say it. So let me. Bosco was quiet for a moment. Say it then, he said. She said it. Quietly, without the performance of emotion, in the specific way of someone who has had their vocabulary for gratitude compressed by years of an environment where gratitude was dangerous. It came out small and dense, the way something comes out when it has been under pressure for a very long time. Bosco nodded once. Petra finished and left the room. Dante arrived 22 minutes later. He came through the freight elevator and into the studio space, and Lyra looked at his left hand, wrapped now, tight, a strip of his own shirt, and his jacket, and the way he was holding his left side, and she said nothing, but her eyes tracked all of it with the careful attention of someone who has learned to assess damage quickly and quietly. He sat in the chair Petra had vacated. He put both hands flat on his knees. 17 hours, he said to the room. He explained what had happened on the roof. He explained Hallie. He explained the arrangement. He left out the rib because it was not actionable information. Lyra listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, He'll use the 17 hours to find us. He'll try, Dante said, which is why in the next 4 hours we do 3 things. 1, Claire files the magistrate petition, not through standard channels and not through Farida's contact. Through a direct communication to the Northern District Duty Magistrate, using the documentation we have as supporting material, with the trafficking connection named explicitly. Claire nodded. She already had her laptop open. 2. Bosco's people push every connection we have in the AG's office and the FBI's organized crime division to get a federal flag on the Rob case tonight. Not a full investigation, a flag, enough to put the name on a federal record. And 3, Bosco said. Dante looked at Lyra. 3, he said, is the gala. The room went quiet. Magnus Ashcombe is hosting a fundraising gala tomorrow night, Dante said. Meridian Hotel, 600 guests, judges, aldermen, federal prosecutors, every major media figure in the city. He's been planning it for 8 months. He cannot cancel it without raising questions he can't afford. He paused. We go. Lyra was looking at him. You want to walk into his event, she said. I want to walk into his event with every piece of documentation we have, and I want to show it to 600 people simultaneously before anyone in that room can stop it. He'll have security. Yes. He'll try to have us removed before we can. Yes, Dante said. Which is why the documentation needs to be on the screens before we arrive. Pre-positioned, accessible, something that cannot be turned off by pulling a single plug. The AV system, Claire said slowly, her lawyer's mind visibly engaging. If someone inside the venue had access to the system before the event, I have someone, Dante said. The room processed this. Lyra looked at him with an expression that was complicated and specific. Not disbelief, not fear, but the expression of a person standing at the edge of something they have been moving toward for years and finding it simultaneously larger and more possible than they expected. If it doesn't work, she said, it's going to work. But if it doesn't, if something goes wrong inside that room and the screens don't fire and Magnus's people get to us before… Lyra, I need to know what happens if it doesn't work, she said. Her voice was steady. I've spent my whole life not knowing what the backup plan was. I need to know. He looked at her. If it doesn't work, he said, we have federal investigators walking into that building behind us who will have the documentation regardless of what happens to the screens. The gala is the public moment. The federal filing is the actual mechanism. One can fail, not both. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. Okay? I said okay. She stood up. Tell me what I need to do tonight to be ready for tomorrow. Dante looked at her for a moment, at the wrapped wrists and the bruised jaw and the gray sweater 2 sizes too large and the expression of someone who had compressed every version of fear into something that looked, from a distance, indistinguishable from calm. He had known a lot of people who were brave in the operational sense, who could move through dangerous situations without freezing, who could manage fear as a physical input rather than a paralytic. He had known fewer people who were brave in the particular way that Lyra was brave, which was the bravery of someone who has been afraid for so long and in such a sustained and intimate way that fear had become simply the medium they moved through, the way water is the medium a fish moves through, present always, no longer remarkable. Tonight, he said, you rest, you eat, you let Petra look at those wrists properly. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, he said, you walk into a room full of your father's people and you don't look away. She nodded. She started to turn toward the hallway. Then her phone, the clean phone Dante's people had given her, the number known to nobody outside this room, buzzed once on the table where she'd set it. She picked it up. She read the message. Her face went to a place that none of them had seen it go before. Not fear, not the compressed stoicism of the last 2 days, something rawer than either. Something that had been locked behind a very heavy door and the door had just come open. She turned and held the phone out to Dante without a word. He took it. He read the message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. 6 words in a photograph. The 6 words were, I know where you are. Come home. The photograph was a man, mid-20s, dark-featured, sitting in what appeared to be the Lincoln Park residence study, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was difficult to read. Dante looked up from the phone. Your brother, he said. Yes, Lyra said. I thought he stayed out of it. So did I, she said. And something in how she said it, the specific fracture line running through 4 words, told Dante that this was the one he hadn't prepared for. Not Magnus, not Renata, not Hallie, not any of the lawyers or mercenaries or compromised judges. The brother who had been silent had been the assumption that everything else rested on, the one variable he hadn't pulled, and now the variable. Dante set the phone down on the table. The studio was quiet except for the ventilation and the distant compression of the city outside the blacked-out windows. Bosco was watching Lyra. Claire was watching Dante. Nobody said anything for a moment because the moment required sitting in rather than filling. Lyra stood with her arms at her sides and her face doing something careful and controlled, and Dante watched the control hold and then, very slightly, not hold and then hold again. "How long has he known where you are?" Dante said. "I don't know." "Has he contacted you before tonight?" "No." She picked the phone back up and looked at the photograph. Her brother in the study, looking at the camera. "Callum wouldn't contact me directly. He never has. Whatever happened in that house, he made himself peripheral to it. Not involved, not complicit, just absent. It was his survival strategy." She set the phone down again. For him to reach out now means something changed. "Magnus told him," Bosco said from his chair. His voice was strained at the edges from the shoulder, but his mind was clearly still running. "Used him as a messenger, which means Magnus either doesn't know this number and is hoping the brother does, or Magnus does know this number and sent the message through Callum to see how Lyra would react. To see if she'd run," Dante said. "To see if she'd run to him," Bosco said. "Back to Lincoln Park. Family pressure is the one thing the lawyers and the mercenaries and the guardianship filing haven't tried yet." Lyra looked at the photograph one more time. Then she put the phone face down on the table with a finality that was its own answer. "He can wait," she said. Dante looked at her. "He's my brother," she said, reading the look. "Not my weakness. There's a difference. I know the difference now." She pulled the gray sweater tighter around herself. "Whatever he has to say, he can say it after." "After tomorrow," Dante said. "After tomorrow," she said. Well, the Meridian Hotel occupied the northeast corner of Michigan Avenue and Erie Street and had been, for 30 years, the preferred venue of the city's philanthropic class for the specific kind of event that wanted to feel important without looking ostentatious. High ceilings, restrained decor, a ballroom that held 600 without feeling crowded, and a discretion baked into the staff that was worth considerably more than the room rate. Magnus Ashcombe had booked it 8 months prior for the annual fundraising gala of the Ashcombe Foundation, and he had not canceled it because Dante had been right. Canceling would have required an explanation, and Magnus Ashcombe was not yet in a position where he could provide one. What Magnus had done instead was double the security presence, which Dante's people had confirmed by 7 p.m. 12 additional personnel beyond the hotel's standard provision, 4 of them at the perimeter, 4 inside the ballroom, 2 on the service level, 2 on the executive floor where Magnus had taken a suite for the evening. No sign of Hallie, which meant Hallie had either gone to ground with the robbed documentation or was waiting to see which way the wind went before committing. Either outcome was acceptable. Neither was guaranteed. Dante dressed in the hotel room he'd taken under a clean name 2 blocks south. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie because he wasn't performing elegance. He was performing presence, and there was a difference. His left hand was wrapped in a thin bandage under his cuff, and his rib informed him with every breath that it was there and that it was unhappy. He had taken 2 ibuprofens and noted their inadequacy, and moved on. Lyra was in the adjoining room. He knocked at 7:40. She opened the door. Claire had sourced the dress. Something simple and dark. High-necked. Nothing that asked for attention. Lyra's hair was back. The bruise on her jaw had been covered, not entirely, a thin layer that softened it without erasing it. The wrapped wrists were visible below the cuffs. She had not asked to have them covered. He looked at her. "Ready," she said. It was not a question. "The AV contact confirmed at 6, he said. "The documentation is preloaded on the system. It fires from a remote trigger at my signal, a text to a number that routes through 2 proxies. He paused. "Federal investigators are arriving at the venue at 9:15, not before. If anything goes wrong before 9:15, it's on us," she said. "It's on us." She nodded. The brother, he said. What about him? He called again. An hour ago. Bosco answered it. Something moved across her face. And? He wants to meet, tonight, before the gala. Dante watched her carefully. He says he has something, documents, records he took from Magnus's study 6 weeks ago when he understood what was being planned for you. The room was quiet for a moment. He knew, she said. Her voice had gone very flat. He says he didn't know everything. He says when he understood the scope of it, he took what he could and has been sitting on it because he didn't know who to give it to. He was waiting, she said. Not with anger, with something more tired than anger. He was waiting to see which way it went. Yes, Dante said. She was quiet for a long moment. What do the documents cover? According to him, the Rab arrangement. Correspondence between Magnus and Rab going back 14 months. Wiring instructions. A contract. Dante paused. If it's what he says it is, it's everything we need in terms Farida can make a federal prosecutor understand before morning. And if it's not what he says it is, then we go in with what we have. She turned away from him and walked to the window and stood there looking at the city, the Michigan Avenue lights, the lake invisible in the dark beyond, the ordinary ongoing movement of a city that did not know or care what was happening in this hotel room. He stood by, she said, for years, every time. She stopped. And now when it's about to fall apart, he shows up with documents. Yes, Dante said, because he's protecting himself. Probably some of that, Dante said. Also possibly because he's 26 years old and has spent his whole life inside the same structure you did, and people who grow up inside a structure generally need the structure to start visibly collapsing before they believe it can. She turned around. That's a generous interpretation, she said. It's not generous, he said. It's just accurate. She looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her face. Not forgiveness exactly. Too complicated and too early for that. But the first movement toward a reckoning that was going to take considerably longer than one night. Set the meeting, she said. 90 minutes before the gala. In a place I choose. Where? She told him. Partout. The bar on the lobby level of the building, 2 blocks from the Meridian, was the kind of place that was expensive enough to be quiet and anonymous enough to be useful. And Callum Ashcombe was already there when they arrived. A young man at a corner table with a drink he hadn't touched, and the look of someone who had not slept in several days. He was dark-featured like his sister, thinner than his photograph. And when he saw Lyra, he started to stand and then seemed to think better of it, and stayed in his chair. Dante sat at the bar and watched. Lyra sat across from her brother. They looked at each other for a long moment with the specific complicated silence of people who share a history that cannot be summarized. You knew, she said. First thing. No preamble. Callum's jaw worked. Not everything. Not, you knew enough. I knew he was trying to get you out of the country. I told myself it was for you, that he was trying to... He stopped, ran a hand across his face. I knew it wasn't. I think I knew for a while. I just didn't let myself... Say it, she said. Don't tell me what you told yourself. Tell me what you knew. He looked at her. I knew he was sending you somewhere you weren't going to come back from, he said. His voice came out quiet and cracked at the edges. I knew it wasn't a clinic. I knew it wasn't... I heard the name Rob. I looked him up. I found enough. He reached into his jacket and put an envelope on the table between them. I took those 6 weeks ago. I didn't know what to do with them. I was afraid of losing your inheritance, she said. The word landed and sat there. Callum didn't deny it. Yes, he said. That too. I'm not going to pretend I'm something I'm not. He looked at the envelope. It was both things at once. I was afraid of him, and I was afraid of losing everything, and I kept waiting for a way to do the right thing that didn't cost me anything. He paused. There isn't one, is there? No, she said. There never was. He nodded slowly. The documents, he said, they're real. The correspondence with Rob, wire transfers. There's a signature page for what they were calling a placement agreement. It has Magnus's signature and Rob's. He looked at her. It's enough. I think it's enough. Lyra looked at the envelope. She picked it up. She didn't open it. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, she said. What you did. What you didn't do. I'm not there yet, and I don't know if I'll get there. I know. But I'm taking these. She stood up. And when this is over, when it's done and there's time, you and I are going to have a longer conversation about all of it. Callum looked up at her from his chair. He looked young, younger than 26. He looked like someone who had been holding something very heavy for a long time and had just set it down and was now reckoning with the shape of himself without it. Okay, he said. She left the envelope unsealed in her hand and walked back to the bar. Dante looked at her face. Let's go, she said. Chap. The ballroom of the Meridian was everything the occasion required, crystal and candlelight, and the low roar of 600 people performing wealth and civic virtue simultaneously, the women in gowns and the men in black tie, and the enormous projection screens on the north and south walls currently displaying a tasteful slideshow of Ashcombe Foundation impact imagery. Children, classrooms, community centers, the careful visual grammar of philanthropic legitimacy. Magnus Ashcombe was near the dais with a champagne flute and his curated warmth at full deployment, moving through his guests with the ease of a man who had done this so many times that the performance had become indistinguishable from the person. He was 63. He was silver-haired and broad-shouldered, and he looked, from any angle in that room, like exactly what he had spent 3 decades constructing. A man of consequence. Renata was 20 feet away, in a gown the color of midnight, working a different cluster of guests with a smile that reached precisely as far as the eyes, and stopped. Dante and Lyra came through the ballroom doors at 8:54. The first person to see them was one of Magnus's security detail near the entrance. Dante watched the recognition move across the man's face and watched him reach for his earpiece. And Dante was already moving into the crowd because a crowd was its own kind of cover, and Lyra was beside him moving without hesitation, her chin up, her bruised jaw visible under the thin layer of cover, the wrapped wrists catching the light from the chandeliers. People noticed her. That was the point. Not dramatically, not a parting of the crowd, not anything cinematic. Just the small cumulative noticing of a room full of people who knew the Ashcombe name and knew the face attached to it and were processing the dissonance of seeing it here, looking like this, beside this particular man. Dante felt his phone vibrate once in his pocket. Confirmation text from the AV contact. Ready. He had 4 minutes. Magnus saw them at 8:56. Dante watched it happen from across the ballroom. The moment Magnus's eyes found Lyra through the crowd, and the specific sequence of things that moved across his face in the next 3 seconds. Surprise first, because whatever he had expected tonight, it was not this. Then calculation, fast and practiced, the instinctive political assessment of what this looked like and who was watching. Then, underneath both of those, something older and colder and far less curated. Magnus handed his champagne to someone beside him and began moving through the crowd. His security moved with him. Screens in 2 minutes, Dante said quietly. Lyra nodded. She wasn't looking at her father. She was looking at the room, cataloging exits, noting faces, doing the kind of environmental reading that people develop when they've spent years in spaces that required it. A woman caught Lyra's arm, mid-50s, someone Dante didn't recognize, and her face had the particular expression of a person who knows they are seeing something important and hasn't yet decided what it means. Lyra, the woman said. My God, are you... What happened to your... I'm fine, Patricia, Lyra said, and there was something in how she said it, the automatic reflexive reassurance that she seemed to hear herself saying, and she stopped and corrected. Actually, she said, I'm not. I haven't been for a long time. She looked at the woman steadily. You're going to want to watch the screens in about 90 seconds. Patricia looked at her, then at the screens, then back. Magnus reached them at 8:58. He came through the last 6 feet of crowd with his security on either side and his expression reconstructed. The warmth gone, replaced by something that was trying to look like paternal concern and landing closer to warning. Lyra. His voice was modulated, quiet enough for discretion, present enough to carry. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is not the place. "Hello, Dad," she said. The word landed between them like something physical. He looked at Dante. "Mr. Vescari, you've made a very serious error in judgment." "That's possible," Dante said. "You need to leave this event. Both of you. Right now, before this becomes something." The screens changed. Both of them simultaneously, north and south walls. The Ashcombe Foundation impact imagery disappeared, and what replaced it was not dramatic, not splashed in red, not accompanied by music. It was simply documents. Clean, factual, clearly rendered documents. Bank records with account numbers and transfer amounts and dates. A contract with 2 signatures at the bottom. Correspondence, screenshotted and time-stamped between an email address registered to Magnus Ashcombe and an email address connected to Dietrich Robb. The room went quiet so fast it was almost physical. 600 people turned toward the screens with the collective instinct of a crowd recognizing that something has changed and not yet understanding what. Magnus turned. He looked at the screens. He looked at them for 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, Dante watched 20 years of careful construction absorb the first impact of what was happening, and the face that Magnus Ashcombe showed in those 3 seconds, before he could manage it, before the reflex kicked in, was not the face of a man being falsely accused. It was the face of a man who had been found. "That's a contract," someone behind Dante said. A man's voice, confused, trying to parse the document on the screen. "What is that? Who is Dietrich Robb?" "Turn those off," Magnus said, not to Dante, to his security, and one of them was already moving toward the AV booth at the back of the room, and he was going to get there, Dante knew. In another 40 seconds, the screens were going to go dark, which was why the next thing mattered. Dante raised his voice. Not a shout. Projection. The voice of a man who had run rooms for 20 years and understood how sound moved through a space. "The man on the screens is Dietrich Robb," he said. "He operates a trafficking network with documented operations in 4 countries. The contract on the screen is a placement agreement for a human being. The signatures belong to Robb and to Magnus Ashcombe." He paused. "The human being named in the contract is standing in this room." The room was completely silent now. Magnus turned from the screens to Dante, and his face had gone through its final transformation, past the warmth, past the calculation, past the found-out rawness of 3 seconds ago, into something stripped and cold and very old. "You have no idea," Magnus said quietly, "what you've just done." "I think I do," Dante said. "You're a criminal. You're a known criminal, and everything you've brought into this room." The documents were authenticated this afternoon by 2 forensic accountants and submitted to the Northern District Federal Court as supporting material for an active investigation. Dante kept his voice level. "The federal investigators walking through the doors of this building right now are not here because of me. They're here because of what's on those screens." He watched Magnus process this. He watched it travel through the man, the information and its implications, the sequence of falling structures, the understanding that the thing he had built over 30 years was not going to survive the night. The screens went dark. The AV booth had been reached. It didn't matter. The room had seen enough. 600 people had seen enough. The phones were already out. Dante could see them in his peripheral vision, people texting, people photographing the now dark screens, people leaning toward each other with the low, urgent murmur of a crowd that has witnessed something and is in the process of deciding what to do with it. Magnus looked at Lyra, and something happened in his face that Dante hadn't expected. Not remorse, not quite, but something adjacent to it, some vestigial recognition of what he was looking at. The person he had made into a ledger entry, standing in front of him in a room full of his peers with her bruised jaw and her wrapped wrists and her chin level. "Lyra," he started. "Don't," she said. One word, flat and absolute. He stopped. And then the federal investigators came through the doors, 4 of them in civilian clothes that nobody in that room was going to mistake for anything other than what they were. And the room restructured itself around their arrival the way rooms do when authority enters, and Magnus Ashcombe, surrounded by his guests and his crystal and his candlelight, understood that there was nowhere left to move. Renata made it as far as the service corridor. Bosco's people, one-shouldered Bosco directing from the lobby, His arm in a hasty sling that Petra had constructed from a hotel scarf had covered the service exits before the gala started, and the woman who met Renata in the service corridor was a federal agent who had been briefed on both the Ashcombe Foundation transfers and the 6-year Cayman account, and Renata's lawyer arrived 40 minutes later to find that the financial documentation was already in federal hands, and the exit she had spent 6 years constructing had been the thing that led investigators directly to her. She said nothing when she was taken out through the hotel's loading dock. Not to the agents, not to her lawyer. She looked straight ahead with the expression of someone who has been in the business of managing appearances for so long that even the collapse of everything is managed. Callum Ashcombe was not at the gala. He was in a conference room 2 blocks away with Farida and a federal prosecutor, going through the documents he had taken from the study, answering questions in the careful voice of someone who understood that cooperation was the only currency he had left. He cooperated fully. The hours after were not dramatic. This was the thing that nobody prepared you for. The way significant things ended, not with climax, but with paperwork. With federal agents asking the same questions in slightly different orders. With lawyers on phones in hotel lobbies. With the slow, unglamorous machinery of institutions doing the thing institutions did when they were finally pointed in the right direction. Dante sat in a chair in the hotel's second-floor business center at 11:40 p.m. and let Petra rewrap his hand properly and said nothing while she did it. "The rib," she said, not looking up. "It's fine." "It's not fine, it's cracked." "It's cracked," he agreed, "not broken. There's a difference." She gave him the look she gave people when they were being professionally unsatisfying and moved on. Lyra found him there an hour later. The gala was long over. The ballroom was being cleared by hotel staff who were doing it with the muted efficiency of people who understood they were tidying up after something significant and had the professionalism not to discuss it. The federal investigators were gone with Magnus, who had been taken from the ballroom with the specific quietness of a public arrest that nobody wanted to be more dramatic than it needed to be. She sat in the chair across from him. She looked tired in the way of someone who has been running on something other than sleep for days, and has now very suddenly used the last of it. "Rab," she said. "Federal warrant issued an hour ago," Dante said. "Interpol notified. He won't move far." She nodded slowly. "Hallie," she said. "He turned over the Rab documentation to an FBI contact at 9 this morning. He's been cooperating since." Dante paused. "He's a complicated man." "Most men are," she said. She looked at her wrapped wrists, turned them over, turned them back. A habit that she probably didn't know she had developed. "The foundation," she said. "The Ashcombe Foundation. There are programs. Real ones. Kids who... Farida is working with the AG's office to separate the legitimate charitable operations from the financial structure," Dante said. "It's not going to be fast, but it's possible." She nodded. "Callum," she said. "Cooperation agreement. He'll likely avoid prosecution. What comes after that is a different conversation." "Yes," she said. "It is." She was quiet for a moment. "He was afraid," she said. "It wasn't a defense, just a statement of fact. He grew up in the same house I did. He saw the same things. He made different choices." She paused. "I used to think he was weak. Now I think he was just more invested in the structure than I was, because the structure worked better for him." "It does that," Dante said. "For some people." She looked at him. "You said that first night that the reason you helped me was because my situation had become adjacent to yours." "I did," he said. "Was that true?" He thought about it. It was the kind of question he would normally deflect, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the answer wasn't simple, and simple answers were the ones you could say out loud without cost. "It was true when I said it," he said. "It got less true as we went." She considered this. "You lost 2 people on that rooftop," she said. "Bosco's shoulder, the contact who burned us. You spent 17 hours in a situation that brought federal attention to your operation in ways that are going to take months to manage." She paused. "Your lawyers are going to tell you this was a disaster." "Farida already told me that," he said. "This morning." And I told her I knew." Lyra looked at him for a long moment. "You're not going to explain it," she said. No, he said. She looked at her hands again. The clinic, she said quietly. The diagnosis. Delusional disorder with paranoid features. She stopped. There are other women. I know there are. People who passed through that household, through my father's world, who signed documents and then disappeared into... She stopped again. Someone needs to go back and look. Claire is already building that case, he said. She has 3 names from the last 4 years. She's looking for more. Lyra nodded. I want to help with that, she said. Not as a victim, as someone who knows how it works, how he worked. The language, the mechanisms, how he built the structure. She looked up. I know it better than anyone. I know you do, Dante said. The business center was quiet around them. The hotel had gone to its late-night register, distant and muffled, the building settling into the small hours. I need to ask you something, Lyra said. Ask. What happens to you now? He looked at her. It wasn't the question he'd expected. You just walked a federal investigation into a room full of your city's establishment class, she said. You put your name on all of this. Magnus's lawyers are going to spend the next 2 years trying to find ways to make you the story instead of him. I've been the story before, he said. This is different. Yes, he agreed. It is. She was looking at him with the same careful, assessing attention she'd turned on him in the back of his car the first night. The look of someone trying to determine whether the thing in front of them is safe. Are you going to be all right? She said. He looked at her for a moment. I don't know yet, he said. It was the honest answer, and he gave it to her because she had earned honest answers. She nodded slowly. Then she did something he didn't expect. She reached across the space between them and put her hand briefly over his wrapped one. Not grasping, not clinging, just present, the way you put a hand on something to confirm it's real. And then she withdrew it and stood up. I'm going to get some sleep, she said. You should, he said. She moved toward the door. At it, she stopped. Didn't turn around. The first night, she said. In your car. I said, please don't send me back. A pause. I've been thinking about that, about what I was asking for. He waited. I wasn't asking to be saved, she said. I don't think I knew that at the time, but that's what it was. She paused. I was asking for enough room to save myself. He looked at her back, the set of her shoulders, the wrapped wrists at the end of her sleeves. You had it, he said. She nodded once, and she walked out, and he sat in the quiet of the business center and let the silence settle around him and breathed through his cracked rib and looked at his wrapped hand and thought about nothing in particular, which was the thing his mind did when it was processing something it wasn't ready to put into words. Months moved the way months do, steadily and without drama, one thing giving way to the next. Magnus Ashcombe was indicted on 11 counts, the most significant being the trafficking conspiracy, for which the Robb documentation provided the federal prosecutors with precisely the direct evidentiary foundation they needed. The trial date was set. He made bail, which was expensive and conditional, and came with a monitor on his ankle, and he moved into the Erie Street condo that Renata had not been living in since the night of the gala, and he became something the city observed from a careful distance. Renata pled to 2 counts related to the financial fraud and 1 count of conspiracy in the attempted assault, in exchange for cooperation with the broader investigation into the foundation's financial practices. The 6-year Cayman account was seized. She moved to a smaller city and a smaller life, and was not, as far as anyone could tell, unhappy about the smaller life in the specific way of someone who had spent years maintaining a large one and found the maintenance exhausting. Dietrich Robb was arrested in Vienna 4 months after the gala, extradited on the Interpol warrant, and brought to the Northern District of Illinois, where he became the center of a federal case that spread considerably wider than the Ashcombe connection, and that Claire Vaux joined as a cooperating civil attorney representing 3 of Robb's prior victims, whose cases had never been formally acknowledged. Callum Ashcombe received a cooperation agreement and no criminal charges and moved to the West Coast, which was far enough. He sent Lyra a letter in the 3rd month. She read it twice and put it in a drawer and didn't respond for 6 weeks, and then she wrote back, 4 sentences. And that was the beginning of something that was going to take a long time and might not fully arrive, but was at least in motion. Trent Halley's cooperation with federal investigators resulted in a reduced exposure finding on his own activities that was less than he deserved and more than zero, which was how those things usually landed. He sent Dante a single text 3 months later that said only, "I checked the Rob documentation. You were right." Dante read it and didn't respond. Bosco's shoulder healed in 6 weeks. He was insufferable about it the entire time, in the particular way of men who found being injured an affront to their professional identity, and then he was fine, and life went on. The foundation that Lyra established didn't have the Ashcombe name. She spent 2 months working with Claire and 3 other attorneys, and a woman named Dr. Reyes who ran the city's largest domestic crisis center. And what emerged from those months was not large and not immediately visible, which was deliberate. It was focused on the specific gap she had fallen into and out of over 24 years, the institutional space between abuse that looked like family and abuse that the law recognized, the documentation support, the psychiatric record challenge process. The mechanism for unsealing the kind of ND, as that were designed not to protect privacy, but to protect abusers from accountability. It was not glamorous work. It was not finished. She went in 3 days a week and did it with the particular focus of someone who understood the terrain from the inside. And the women who came through the foundation's intake process found, more often than not, that the person across the desk from them did not have the expression of someone performing compassion, but of someone who had been in the same room and knew the dimensions of it. The scars didn't go away. She hadn't expected them to. What changed was subtler and more fundamental than their absence. It was the relationship to them, the way they stopped being the thing that defined the edges of everything and became instead just part of the landscape, present and acknowledged and no longer in charge. It was 6 months after the gala when Dante found her on the rooftop of the River North building. Not the Lakeshore penthouse. She didn't go back there. The River North building, the photography studio, where the last hours before everything changed had been spent. She had taken the freight elevator up at dusk and was standing at the rooftop edge looking at the city when she heard the elevator open behind her. She turned. He looked the same, which was to say, he looked like someone who had been under pressure for 20 years and had found a way to carry it without being crushed by it. The hand had healed. Whatever was happening with his operation and the federal attention it had drawn was ongoing and managed and would continue to be both of those things for as long as it continued. He came to stand beside her. Below them, Chicago moved through its evening business. The lights coming on block by block, the lake going dark at the edge of the city's glow, the traffic and the noise and the 10,000 individual things happening simultaneously in the enormous and different machinery of a city that contained them without knowing them. "Claire tells me the 3rd intake case settled," he said. "Yesterday," she said, "the family's trying to appeal. They won't succeed." "No?" he said. "They won't." They stood for a moment. "Farida says your situation is manageable," she said. "Farida's definition of manageable is aggressive," he said. She almost smiled. "Are you sorry?" she said. He thought about it. "No," he said. "Are you?" She looked at the city, the lake, the place where the water disappeared into the dark. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said. "I'm sorry for every year before the parking garage. I'm sorry for the years I spent believing the only exit was the one he was building." She paused. "I'm not sorry for any of the rest of it." He nodded. She turned and looked at him. "You know what I keep thinking about," she said. "That first night. In the car. You asked me to explain why I didn't want to go home, and I said I couldn't, not yet." "I remember. I had all these explanations," she said, "all these versions of the truth I'd been carrying for years, and the only thing that came out was, 'Please don't send me back.'" She paused. 3 words. "And you made a decision based on 3 words from a stranger." 4 words, he said. She looked at him. "Please don't send me back," he said. 4. She looked at him for a moment, then she laughed. It was not a performance. It was not the managed, controlled expression of a woman who had spent 24 years monitoring what she showed to the world. It was a short, genuine, slightly surprised sound. The kind that comes out of people when something catches them off guard in a way they hadn't budgeted for. It lasted only a moment. But Dante Vescari, who was not a man given to noting things like this and noting them clearly, noted it. The city spread before them, enormous and alive and completely indifferent, the way cities are. And below the indifference, in the foundation offices and the federal courtrooms, and the letters that traveled between coasts and the small, incremental work of people trying to make something better out of what had been made worse, other things were happening. Not finished, not clean, but moving.